I, 29F, have been married to my husband David, 32M, for 4 years. We generally have a good relationship, but I'm furious with him right now, and he's saying I'm being unreasonable. I've kept a personal journal since I was a teenager. It's something I've always done to process my thoughts and emotions, especially when I'm stressed or working through problems. David has always known about my journaling. I write in it most evenings before bed, and I keep my journal on my nightstand. I've never hidden the fact that I keep a journal, but I've also never offered to share it with David because it's my private space for working through feelings. David has occasionally made jokes about being curious what I write about, but he's never directly asked to read it. Last week, I had a really stressful few days at work. My boss has been micromanaging me on a big project, and I was feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. I also had some concerns about our finances because David had made a large purchase without discussing it with me first. He bought a new gaming setup that cost $1,200. When the gaming setup arrived, I was surprised because we hadn't talked about such a big expense. David said he'd been planning to buy it for months and that it was his money, so he didn't think he needed to discuss it with me first. I was upset that he'd made such a large purchase without at least giving me a heads up, especially since we're supposed to be saving for house down payment. But I didn't want to have a big fight about it, so I told David I was disappointed in his lack of communication, but that we could talk about it later. That night, I wrote in my journal about feeling frustrated with David's impulsive spending and his attitude that he doesn't need to discuss major purchases with me. I also wrote about feeling like he sometimes doesn't consider how his decisions affect me or our shared goals. I wasn't writing anything cruel or mean. I was just processing my feelings about the situation and trying to work through my emotions so I could approach the conversation with David more calmly. 2 days later, I came home from work to find David sitting on our couch looking upset. He immediately confronted me about what I had written in my journal. David said that he had read my journal while I was at work and that he was hurt by the things I had written about him. He said that I had called him inconsiderate and questioned whether he cared about our future together. I was absolutely shocked that David had read my journal. I asked him why he would violate my privacy like that, and he said that he had noticed I seemed distant and upset, and he wanted to understand what was wrong. David said that he thought reading my journal would help him figure out how to make me feel better, and that he was trying to be a good husband by understanding my feelings. I told David that I was furious that he had read my private thoughts without permission. I explained that my journal is where I process my emotions before I'm ready to discuss them, and that he had no right to invade that space. David got defensive and said that married couples shouldn't have secrets from each other. He said that if I was writing about him, he had a right to know what I was saying. I told David that having private thoughts and working through emotions privately is not the same as keeping secrets. I said that everyone deserves to have some personal space, even in marriage, and that my journal was mine. David said that he was hurt that I would write negative things about him instead of just talking to him directly. He said that it felt like I was talking behind his back, even though I was just writing in my own journal. I explained to David that I use my journal to process my initial emotional reactions so that I can approach conversations with him more thoughtfully and calmly. I told him that the things I write in my journal are often just my immediate feelings, and that I work through them privately before deciding how to address issues in our relationship. David apologized for reading my journal and said he understood that it was wrong. He promised never to do it again, but then asked if we could discuss the spending issue since he now knew it was bothering me. I told David that I needed time to process the violation of trust before I could have a productive conversation about anything else. That seemed to be the end of it, but 3 days later, I caught David reading my journal again. This time, I had been writing about how betrayed I felt by his violation of my privacy and how I was struggling to trust him again. I had also written about feeling like David was more concerned with defending himself than understanding why his actions were wronged. When I confronted David about reading my journal again, he didn't even try to deny it. He said that he needed to know if I was still angry with him and how long I was going to punish him for making a mistake. I told David that reading my journal again after I had explicitly told him how violated I felt was proof that he didn't understand or respect my boundaries at all. David said that he was sorry, but that he felt like I wasn't being honest with him about my feelings. He said that I had been acting normal during the day, but was apparently still furious with him based on what I was writing. I told David that I was trying to work through my feelings privately so that I wouldn't take my anger out on him unfairly, and that his response was to violate my privacy again. Then David said something that really alarmed me. He said that maybe the problem was that I was writing about him at all, and that if I stopped keeping a journal, we wouldn't have these issues. I told David that suggesting I give up journaling proved he wanted to control my private thoughts and emotional processing. David said he wasn't trying to control me, but that it was unnatural for me to work through problems about our marriage without including him in the process. Now David is demanding that I apologize for the hurtful things I wrote about him. He says that while reading my journal was wrong, I was also wrong to write such negative things about him instead of talking to him directly. He's also suggesting that going forward, I should share relevant parts of my journal with him so that he knows when I'm upset about something and can address it immediately. I told David that I will not apologize for my private thoughts, and that his suggestion proves he still doesn't understand why his actions were wronged. David is saying I'm being stubborn and unforgiving. He says he's trying to rebuild our relationship, but that I'm refusing to take any responsibility for my part in this situation. Am I in the wrong for refusing to apologize for my private thoughts? Should I be more understanding of David's hurt feelings about what I wrote? Update 4 days later. Thank you to everyone who responded to my original post. The overwhelming support helped me realize that David's behavior was more concerning than I initially understood. Since my last post, David has been testing my boundaries in ways that are making me increasingly uncomfortable. Yesterday, I noticed that David had moved my journal from my nightstand to his side of the bed. When I asked him about it, he said he was helping me by keeping it where he could remind me to write in it if I seemed upset. I told David that moving my journal without asking was another violation of my boundaries, and he said I was being paranoid because he was just trying to be supportive. I also discovered that David has been monitoring my other private spaces. I found that he had been going through my phone's browser history and reading my text messages. When I confronted him, he said he was just trying to understand me better and make sure I wasn't building up resentments that I wasn't sharing with him. David said that since he couldn't read my journal anymore, he needed other ways to know what I was thinking and feeling. I told David that going through my phone was another invasion of privacy, and he said that married couples should be transparent with each other. Most disturbing, David has started questioning me about conversations I have with friends and coworkers. He wants to know exactly what we discussed and seems particularly interested in whether I've talked to anyone about our relationship. When I told my friend Sarah about the journal situation during our lunch yesterday, David somehow knew about our conversation when I got home. He asked me what I had told Sarah and whether she had given me advice about our marriage. I asked David how he knew I had talked to Sarah about our relationship, and he said that he could tell from my behavior and that he was just checking his intuition. But I suspect David has been monitoring my activities more closely than he's admitting. I'm starting to feel like I'm under surveillance in my own home. When I told David that his behavior was making me feel watched and controlled, he said that he was just trying to reconnect with me after the trust issues caused by my journal writing. David said that if I was more open with him about my thoughts and feelings, he wouldn't need to investigate to understand what was going on with me. I told David that his logic was backwards. His invasive behavior was making me want to share less with him, not more. David then made a statement that really scared me. He said that he had been thinking about our situation, and he believed that the root problem was that I had too much privacy in our marriage. He said that he thought we should implement a policy of complete openness, where we share all of our thoughts, activities, and communications with each other. David presented this as a solution that would prevent future misunderstandings and help us build a stronger relationship. I told David that his idea of complete openness sounded like complete control and that healthy relationships require both intimacy and individual privacy. David said that he disagreed and that he thought privacy was just an excuse for people to hide things from their partners. When I asked David if he would be comfortable with me monitoring all of his activities and communications, he said that he would be fine with it because he had nothing to hide. But then I realized something that made David's position even more hypocritical. Last month, David had been secretive about planning a surprise birthday party for me. He had private conversations with my friends and family, kept his planning notes hidden, and even lied to me about his whereabouts when he was shopping for party supplies. When I pointed this out to David, he said that was different because he was doing something nice for me. I told David that his surprise party planning proved that he understood the value of privacy when it served his purposes, but that he wanted to eliminate my privacy when it made him uncomfortable. David got angry and said that I was twisting his words and that keeping secrets to plan a surprise party was completely different from writing negative things about him in a journal. I told David that both situations involved private thoughts and activities, and that his double standard showed that this wasn't really about transparency, it was about control. David said that I was being difficult and argumentative, and that I was looking for reasons to avoid taking responsibility for hurting his feelings. We've been sleeping in separate rooms since this conversation, and I'm starting to realize that this conflict has revealed something fundamental about how David views our relationship. Update 2 to 1 week later. The situation has escalated in ways I didn't expect, and I'm now seeing David's behavior as part of a larger pattern that I hadn't recognized before. After our last conversation, David seemed to back off from his demands about complete openness, and I thought maybe he was finally understanding my perspective. Instead, I discovered that David has been taking more covert approaches to monitoring my private life. 2 days ago, I found a small recording device hidden in our bedroom. It was tucked behind my jewelry box, positioned where it would pick up conversations I had on the phone or with friends when David wasn't home. When I confronted David about the recording device, he initially denied knowing anything about it. But when I pointed out that it was a device he had ordered for home security months ago, he admitted to placing it there. David said that he was concerned about my mental state and wanted to make sure I wasn't saying things to friends that would damage our marriage or get me worked up about our relationship problems. He said that he thought monitoring my private conversations would help him understand what I was really thinking and allow him to address problems before they got worse. I told David that secretly recording my private conversations was not only a violation of my privacy, but potentially illegal. He said that it was legal to record conversations in our own home and that he was just trying to protect our marriage. When I asked David how long he had been recording me, he said it was only for a few days, but his evasive answer made me suspect it had been longer. I also discovered that David had installed tracking software on my phone. The app was hidden and showed him my location, my browsing history, and my text messages in real time. David said that he had installed the tracking software because he was worried about me and wanted to make sure I was safe. He said that my erratic behavior since the journal incident had him concerned that I might do something drastic. When I asked David what he meant by drastic, he said he was worried that I might leave him or talk to a lawyer about divorce. I told David that his behavior was making me consider both of those options, and he said that was exactly why he needed to monitor my activities, to prevent me from making impulsive decisions that would destroy our marriage. I realized that David's escalating surveillance wasn't random, it was strategic. He was trying to control my access to outside perspectives and support systems that might help me understand that his behavior was abusive. When I told David that I wanted him to remove all monitoring devices and software immediately, he said that he would consider it if I agreed to share my journal with him voluntarily. David presented this as a compromise. He would stop secretly monitoring me if I would openly share my private thoughts with him. I told David that this wasn't a compromise, it was an ultimatum, and that both options involved him controlling my privacy. David said that he was trying to find a solution that worked for both of us, and that my refusal to consider his proposal showed that I wasn't committed to fixing our marriage. At that point, I realized that David genuinely believed that he was entitled to access my private thoughts and activities, and that he saw my resistance as unreasonable and selfish. I told David that I was going to stay with my sister for a few days while I figured out what to do about our marriage. David became very upset and said that my leaving would prove that I was giving up on our relationship instead of working through our problems. He also said that if I left, he would have no choice but to assume that I was planning to divorce him and that he would need to protect himself accordingly. When I asked David what he meant by protecting himself, he said that he would need to document my unstable behavior and abandonment of our marriage in case we ended up in divorce proceedings. This threat made it clear that David saw our relationship as a competition where he needed to gather evidence against me rather than work with me to solve problems. I packed a bag and left that night. David sent me dozens of texts over the next 24 hours, alternating between apologies and accusations. He said that he was sorry for going too far with the monitoring, but that my reaction was extreme and proved that I had something to hide. David also said that my leaving was emotional manipulation and that I was punishing him for trying to save our marriage. I'm staying with my sister now and trying to figure out what to do next. My sister has been helping me understand that David's behavior fits the pattern of emotional abuse and coercive control. I thought I was dealing with a husband who had boundary issues, but I'm starting to realize that I was dealing with someone who fundamentally doesn't believe I have the right to privacy or individual identity within our marriage. Final update, 2 weeks later. I wanted to provide a final update because this situation has reached a resolution, and I think my experience might be helpful for others in similar situations. After staying with my sister for a week, I decided that I wanted to try couples counseling before making any permanent decisions about my marriage. Despite everything that had happened, I still loved David and hoped that professional help might make him understand why his behavior was so damaging. David was eager to start counseling, which I initially took as a positive sign. He said he was willing to do whatever it took to save our marriage and that he understood he had made mistakes. However, the counseling sessions revealed that David's issues were much deeper and more entrenched than I had realized. In our first session, David spent most of the time explaining to the counselor why he felt justified in monitoring my activities. He presented himself as a concerned husband who was trying to understand his wife's emotional state and protect their marriage from outside influences. David told the counselor that I was secretive and closed off, and that his monitoring was necessary because I wouldn't communicate with him directly about my feelings. When the counselor asked David how he would feel if I monitored his activities in the same way, David said that he would welcome it because he believed that married couples should be completely transparent with each other. The counselor asked David if he understood the difference between choosing to share something and having it taken without permission. David said that he understood the difference in theory, but that he thought the normal rules about privacy didn't apply to married couples. What was most revealing was David's reaction when the counselor suggested that everyone needs some private mental and emotional space, even in marriage. David became visibly agitated and said that he didn't understand why anyone would want to keep thoughts or feelings private from their spouse. He said that wanting privacy seemed like evidence of disloyalty or dishonesty. The counselor asked David if he had any thoughts or experiences that he kept private, and David claimed that he shared everything with me and expected the same in return. But then the counselor asked David about his surprise party planning for my birthday, and David's response was very telling. David said that surprise planning was different because it was positive and for my benefit, but that my private journaling was negative and harmful to the relationship. The counselor pointed out that David was applying different standards based on whether the privacy served his purposes or made him uncomfortable. Over several sessions, it became clear that David had a fundamental belief that my thoughts, emotions, and experiences belonged to him as much as they belonged to me. David genuinely couldn't understand why I would want to process emotions privately or have conversations with friends that he wasn't part of. The counselor worked with David to help him understand that healthy relationships require individual autonomy as well as intimacy, but David kept returning to the idea that privacy was inherently threatening to marriage. In our final session, the counselor asked David directly if he could accept that I might have thoughts and experiences that I chose not to share with him, and David said that he didn't think he could be comfortable in a marriage like that. David said that not knowing what I was thinking made him feel anxious and insecure, and that he believed complete openness was the only way to have a truly intimate relationship. When the counselor asked me how I felt about David's position, I said that I felt like David wanted to merge our identities rather than build a partnership between two individuals. The counselor told us that some couples have fundamental incompatibilities around boundaries and autonomy, and that these differences can be impossible to reconcile. David and I have decided to divorce. He still believes that his desire for complete access to my inner life was reasonable and loving, and I believe that his behavior was controlling and unsustainable. The counselor explained to us that David's need to monitor and control my private thoughts was likely rooted in deep insecurity and anxiety, but that his unwillingness to work on these issues made it impossible for us to have a healthy relationship. I'm sad that our marriage is ending, but I'm also relieved that I no longer have to constantly guard my privacy or worry about my thoughts and activities being monitored. David is a good person in many ways, but his inability to tolerate my individual autonomy made our relationship impossible to sustain. I've learned that love alone isn't enough to make a relationship work. You also need mutual respect for each other's boundaries and individual identity. For anyone dealing with similar issues, trust your instincts about your need for privacy and autonomy. These aren't selfish demands, they're basic requirements for maintaining your individual identity within a relationship. If your partner can't tolerate the fact that you have an inner life that doesn't revolve around them, that's a fundamental compatibility issue that probably can't be resolved through communication or compromise. I'm moving forward with confidence that I made the right decision, even though it was incredibly difficult.